it's Mike DiLisio, and as you can probably see and hear, my studio is still not quite set up. So I'm coming to you from an empty bunker within the Dice Tower Midwest Annex. But I'm still going to be coming to you with a rapid fire roundup where I'm going to be talking about 9 games that I've played that other people on the channel have already reviewed and given a full review and score for. And I'm not going to be going into a full review by any means, just quick thoughts on these games, letting you know what my rating for them would have been, and I'm going to go in order from the least liked to the most liked. So let's just go ahead and get this started. First up, we've got a small box card game from DeVere called Winter, which is a very simple game. It's really a game that's played in 2 stages, where you are first getting cards and then playing them out onto a table, and you're trying to kind of create patterns. It's a 2-player game. And while I thought it was an interesting idea, it really just didn't create a whole lot of excitement. I felt like it's a game that would kind of play out the same way every single time you played, not very dynamic, not a whole lot going on that would make you want to keep coming back to it. So I gave a 5 to Winter. Coming up next is a larger box game, and a game that I actually was pretty excited about when I first saw it, and even learned about the concept behind it, and this is called Precognition. This is also essentially a card game, although everyone has their own player boards as well. And the idea behind it is that you are kind of trying to take some limited information to create card synergies by seeing what cards are going to be passed. You are taking some cards and you're passing them to your neighbor, and they are passing cards to you, and you are trying to, again, use some bits of information to try to create synergy so that you get the same colored cards that you're playing that are going to allow you to take a stronger version of an action. And it's a game that I felt like kind of rested on that central conceit that did not really come across as being terribly impactful for me. I ended up giving this a 5 as well. I just felt like it was a game that had a lot of promise, but it was a much slighter game than I expected it to be. It felt like it was over very quickly. Not a whole lot going on, in my opinion. The actions were just kind of by the numbers for me. So didn't really like it. It was a shame because I was looking forward to that one. Coming up next is For Sale Autorama. And this is kind of a re-implementation of a classic card game called For Sale. And a very well-regarded game, a game that I like. And unfortunately, I think that this redo, by adding another kind of phase to the game, lessens the impact of it. So I gave this one a 6. I think it's fine, but I would never choose to play this over base For Sale. And why they didn't just put the rules for base For Sale in this box, I will never understand, because if they had, and I guess you still could play it that way, but you shouldn't have to go elsewhere to kind of find out how the game is played in its standard mode. So here you've got, it used to be a 2-phase game, now it's a 3-phase game, and I just would always prefer to play For Sale without the extra kind of added elements of this game. I just feel like it takes a very streamlined and elegant game and makes it a bit more convoluted, unnecessarily so. So again, a 6 for Sale Automania. Up next is Untamed Feral, I suppose, Factions. This is a battling style card game, and I just want to put out there right off the bat that these typically are not my types of games. I gave this a 6. I don't think it's a bad game, and for a game of this type, which is kind of like card powers, almost Magic-esque in the sense that you are kind of having to pay, I don't think it's mana, I don't know what they call it, but you're having to kind of have a type of currency that you're using to put cards out on the battlefield. You can attack other players' characters or attack kind of their base directly. I enjoy what it does. It's more streamlined, simpler than something like Magic, and I appreciate that. I also did appreciate that you could play as different animal factions that all kind of play slightly differently, and so that adds a nice bit of replayability to the game and kind of spices it up a little bit. But again, this is not really my type of game, so I don't have a lot of interest in playing it again, although if someone requested it, I wouldn't turn it down. It's not a bad game. Next is Hamlet. This is another game that I was very much looking forward to coming from Mighty Board Games. And unfortunately, I feel like the production let this one down significantly to the extent that I'm giving it a 7. I think this is a game that I might have been able to, almost surely would have been able to recommend if not for some pretty dire and significant component issues where essentially there's a couple of things. Number one is that the iconography is too small and the componentry is too small. It just is. You have to be able to see things across the board, and it's these irregular shaped tiles that you're placing out to kind of create the game board area. And I like that. I like the kind of the different shaped tiles, and I like kind of, it almost reminded me a little bit of Keyflower in the sense that you are having to kind of get resources and move them along little paths that you create using donkeys in this case. And I like that central idea. I like that conceit. I like the idea of building up the portions of the church to create the Hamlet. But the deluxe version of the game, which is the one that I've played, has this cardboard construct that is the church that A, doesn't stay together terribly well, and B, even obscures your vision more. So on top of having tiny little components, tiny little icons, you've got this large cardboard construct that makes it even harder to see and just makes the usability of the game less than it should be. And so unfortunately I had to give a 6 to Hamlet. Next is Bargain Basement Bathysphere. This is a roll and write game that apparently started out as a print and play version and now has been picked up by WizKids and is a kind of a retail version of the game. And it's interesting. It does some things I like, but overall I can't quite recommend it. I'm also giving this a 6 out of 10 because I feel like the way that they kind of got around this idea of playing through a campaign, it's a solo-only roll and write campaign game where you play through, there are 3 different kind of player boards, and each scenario is going to have you playing on certain parts of each of those player boards. Sometimes you even combine the boards together. And then eventually you'll get little mini games in between. It all sounds interesting, and it is in theory, but in practice, A, I find it to be a bit repetitive. There's not as much kind of variety as the system might promise. And B, being able to keep track of which areas of each one of these boards I found to be kind of obnoxious and fiddly in practice. And so it just is another one that there's so many roll and write games out there that I would choose to play before this one. So 6 out of 10. Next up, we've got a tiny little card game. I have a lot of small card games in this batch, and this is called Vegetable Stock. This is one that I am recommending. I'm giving this a 7 out of 10. Now, Chris here at the Dice Tower was a huge fan. I think he gave it either a 9 or a 10 out of 10. I am not quite to that level of enjoyment, but it's a clever, super quick, easy to teach card game where you are kind of drafting cards, and whichever card doesn't get taken is going to adjust a market. And as soon as each of these vegetables get to the top of their value, if they get kind of chosen again, then they drop back down. Very simple, almost right on the edge of not being enough decisions to make, but for as quick as the game is, as easy it is to play and teach, and as much as it gives you that, let's play it again type of a feel, I can easily recommend Vegetable Stock at a 7 out of 10. Up next is Pollen. This is a re-implementation of Samurai the card game from designer Reiner Knizia. I am it's been well versed how much I am a fan of many of Reiner Knizia's designs, not all. And this is one that I had not played before in its original version. This edition, Pollen, was my first exposure to it, and boy, I really enjoyed it. I give this an 8 out of 10. This is a game that maybe belies what type of game it is with the presentation and the production and the theme, which is being, bees and beetles and butterflies. This is a very cutthroat and potentially mean game that has some pretty unique scoring elements, as many of this designer's games often do. Some might find the scoring a little bit unintuitive. For me, it was not that difficult to wrap my mind around. Certainly after one game, I felt comfortable with it. But it is something that maybe will throw people off in their first game. But it is essentially an area kind of majority game where you are trying to gain the majority in as many of the different types of creatures as you can, but you have to make sure that you are being somewhat diverse across those as well, or else you can lose in a couple of different loss conditions. So Pollen is a game with a beautiful production, a really kind of snappy game, but with a lot of crunchy decisions. So I like Pollen quite a bit, 8 out of 10. And then my highest rated game of this batch is Maul Peak, which I'm giving an 8.5 out of 10. This is a standalone sequel to one of my favorite two-player games of the last few years called Skull Hollow. And Maul Peak is essentially more of the same. So a game system that I already really liked, now with new creatures. This is an asymmetric two-player game, although now you can combine it with Skull Hollow for a four-player game. I have to say I have not played that four-player game. This is strictly for the in-the-box two-player mode. But as an asymmetric two-player game where one player is playing as these forest creatures, another is playing as a large guardian, just like in Skull Hollow, this is something that is more of what I already love, slight little tweaks to the original system, and the ability now to play it as a four-player game I think is fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to kind of trying out that mode. But just as a two-player mode, I really have enjoyed Maul Peak, and that's not a surprise based on how much I enjoyed Skull Hollow. All right, well, that is it for me in this rapid-fire roundup. This is Mike DiLisio signing off from Dice Tower Midwest Annex.